The absolute is essentially a result. It's only at the very end of a long, exhausting process that it becomes what it truly is. Hegel actually describes this whole process as a ladder that we have to climb, or what he calls a way of despair. So, yeah, it's definitely not a comfortable elevator ride to the top. It is a necessary path where spirit, which is basically Hegel's term for human consciousness in our collective culture, goes on this epic quest through history. And along the way, it faces intense trials, massive contradictions, and profound alienation. Essentially, every time human consciousness thinks it has the world completely figured out, that worldview collapses, forcing it to climb to a higher, more comprehensive rung on the ladder. So, here is our trail map for today. We're going to cover the climb to absolute knowledge, when substance becomes subject, the leap from religion to science, recollection, turning history into science, how the circle closes, and finally, absolute knowledge today. All right, let's jump right into part 1, the climb to absolute knowledge. See, we can't just airlift ourselves straight to the top. The view from the summit only really makes sense if you've felt the burn in your legs to get there. Human consciousness has to go through an evolution, right? From its lowest level of awareness all the way to absolute knowing. We start out with basic sense certainty, literally just touching and seeing the things right in front of us. Eventually, we evolve through complex social and cultural forms, reaching revealed religion and finally absolute knowledge. But here's the brilliant Hegelian twist. Each prior stage is preserved, even as it gets canceled out or sublated in the final result. Nothing is ever truly lost. The errors of the past, they're just internalized to build a much richer truth. Which brings us to part 2, when substance becomes subject. Now, this is without a doubt one of Hegel's most famous philosophical maneuvers, and it completely flips how we view our relationship to the universe. Ordinary consciousness thinks truth is an external substance out there. We usually think of reality as this giant container of things, independent objects that exist totally separate from us. But the Hegelian breakthrough reveals that reality is actually a self-aware subject. The external world isn't some alien place. It's the product of spirit's own self-externalization. The universe isn't just a physical substance we're passively observing. It's an active process of development that we are intimately a part of. We are literally the universe trying to understand itself. And because of that incredible realization, we reach a profound state of harmony, what Hegel calls the ultimate word of reconciliation. The object you're looking at is no longer alien or foreign. Spirit beholds itself as the universal essence in its own individuality. The gap between what things appear to be and what they essentially are is finally closed. The separation between the knower and the known just vanishes. Let's move on to part 3, the leap from religion to science. Before we reach science, and just to clarify, by science or Wissenschaft, Hegel doesn't mean chemistry in a lab. He means systematic, comprehensive philosophical knowing. We actually go through religion. Religion hits a sort of false summit by viewing the absolute as an external beyond. Truth is grasped through representation, or what Hegel calls picture thinking. It's like picturing God as a separate entity up in the clouds. But to reach absolute knowledge, science has to translate these religious representations into comprehensive thought, or the concept. It takes the profound truths found in religion and strips away the imagery, grasping them purely through rational, conceptual logic. As you'll see in modern scholarly discussions, this transition is incredibly complex. Spirit literally has to externalize itself from its own form to grasp its pure concept, becoming speculative philosophy. The absolute isn't a dead, motionless resting place. It's a wildly dynamic system of thought that is eternally creating and overcoming opposition. This is where philosophy truly transcends mere representation and becomes the active self-knowing of spirit. That takes us to part 4, recollection and how history turns into science. So, how exactly do we bridge the massive gap between our messy, chaotic human history and this pristine concept of science? Well, Hegel answers this with a brilliant bit of wordplay. He uses the German word for recollection, Erinnerung, but he hyphenates it to mean Innerung, literally inwardizing. For Hegel, absolute knowledge is not an escape from time. It is history grasped in the concept. It's the process by which spirit looks back, remembers all its past historical shapes, all the wars, the art, the empires, the huge cultural shifts, strips them of their random contingencies and internalizes them. Our history is quite literally the raw material that science organizes into absolute truth. Because ultimate truth, it's not found in some peaceful, static void. Hegel famously calls this comprehended history the Calvary of absolute spirit. It's a really striking image of suffering and sacrifice. Without the pain, the failures, and the historical development of real people in the real world, the absolute would be completely lifeless, solitary, and alone. Science and history are permanently, unavoidably bound together. Science requires the intense struggle of history to have any real content at all. Which brings us to part 5. The circle closes. We've finally reached the true summit, and here Hegel delivers a massive plot twist regarding the standpoint of the we. Throughout the entire book, Hegel writes from the perspective of we, the philosophical observers who are watching consciousness stumble and learn throughout history. But at this absolute standpoint, the observers witnessing the progression finally become one with the consciousness taking the journey. The gap between the philosopher reading the book and the historical spirit being written about completely dissolves. You, the reader, realize that you are the self-knowing spirit. But having reached this concept of pure knowing, the journey doesn't just hit a brick wall. Instead, Hegel's ground system forms a circle where the end returns right back to the beginning. Spirit freely releases itself back into the immediacy of nature and history to begin the whole cycle anew, or it transitions into the science of logic to examine the pure categories of thought. The absolute isn't a straight line, it's a totally dynamic, self-sustaining loop. Finally, let's hit part 6, absolute knowledge today. Let's be honest here, claiming to have absolute knowledge sounds a little arrogant in the 21st century, doesn't it? But far from meaning we literally know everything, like some kind of cosmic encyclopedia, modern interpretations actually offer a much more grounded view. Scholars like Slavoj Žižek argue that absolute knowledge is really the final recognition of our limitations, the realization that there is no perfect, harmonized totality or big other pulling the strings behind the scenes. Other scholars view it as a form of deep, practical wisdom. It gives us a guide to acting in the world with prudence and peace, finally free from those stubborn illusions and contradictions that grip ordinary, everyday consciousness. We've climbed the immense ladder of history, inwardized our past, and watched substance transform into subject. But the circle is always turning. Which leaves us to wonder, now that we've reached this peak and recognized how our scientific knowledge is so deeply bound up in our history, what new, unexpected history is our self-conscious spirit going to write next? Das war